SharePoint 2010 provides an infrastructure that allows you to consume and manipulate SharePoint data from client applications, even when those client applications are not running in the context of a SharePoint farm or even on a SharePoint server. So for example, you may be building a Windows application or WPF application, or maybe a console or ASP.NET web solution, or perhaps even a Silverlight solution that runs in SharePoint, or maybe a Silverlight solution that runs outside of SharePoint in either a non-SharePoint website or perhaps as a desktop application. And what you can do is use the client object model in all of these types of applications to consume and manipulate data from SharePoint. SharePoint provides the data platform in terms of sites and list data and so forth, and your client object model, and the client object model will connect to and consume that data based on how you construct your client object model objects. So we will see a few examples in the rest of this video. What we also have is the REST APIs that allows your solution to work with list data in a strongly typed manner. So how does all of this work? Well, a client application will build an instance of the client context, and we will instantiate that and set its context to your SharePoint site collection or site. Your client application can then batch together a series of commands, such as maybe loading a site and loading a list and modifying the data in the list, and can then call execute query. Or if you're working in Silverlight or the JavaScript UI, you'll typically call execute query async. But either way, when that call gets made, your client object model will contact the client service on the SharePoint server, and that's based on the information you provided when you constructed your client context. And your server will then execute the commands in the batch and will send you the results back via JSON. So here's a very brief example of connecting to SharePoint and retrieving some sort of data. What we build up is a client context object called client CTX, and in its constructor we provide the URL to our SharePoint site. We can then start building site objects, which in the client realm are the equivalent of SP site objects on the server. And then we can perform operations such as loading the root web, or maybe setting a web object variable, which is the client equivalent of SP web. We can then iterate through, for example, the web templates collection of the web, and in this very simple example we write those out to the console. So there we have a number of web templates that are available to us. Here's another example of actually using one of those web templates in the site creation process, again from your client application. We have a client context, and that's instantiated to the same intranet site. We instantiate a site object and load that. We also instantiate a web object, and we work with, this time, the web creation information class to build a new object called web info. And this web creation information class literally provides the information that we need to create a new web object on the server. So we set things like its description and title and URL properties. We can specify its language and whether it uses the same permissions as the parent site, for example. And then we use the web template that we have retrieved in the previous code snippet to set the web template for the new site. We can then call rootweb.webs.add, which is very similar to doing that on the server. But this time we provide the web creation information object as a parameter or an argument to that method call. And then we can call execute query again. And effectively at that point, our client object model will take these batch commands and send them to the client service. And the client service will perform those commands, and the net result will be that we have a new web created. So we will see many more examples of the client object model throughout the rest of this module, including using it from Silverlight and Windows Presentation Foundation applications and so forth.